Since the beginning of the space rage triggered by the launch of Sputnik in 1957, the United Nations has accorded significant importance to the promotion of greater international collaboration in outer space. The potentials of space technology for socioeconomic development then and today are huge. And the members of the UN agreed that the best way to reap these benefits was through international cooperation in the peaceful uses of outer space. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs works to promote international cooperation in a peaceful use and exploration of space, and in the utilization of space science and technology for sustainable economic and social development. Our next two speakers will give us in some detail overviews of two initiatives supported by the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs. And I see that David is up there. Hi, David.
Hello.
So the first speaker is Dr. David Kendall, who is joining us from Victoria, British Columbia in Canada. During his career, Dr. Kendall has acted in various capacities on a number of national and international bodies, including the International Space University, the International Astronautical Federation, the Committee on Space Research, the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, the European Space Agency, the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee, the Group on Earth Observations, and the Natural Sciences Engineering Research Council of Canada. I would be remiss, in addition to all these great affiliations that Dr. Kendall has had, I would be remiss if I didn't remind the audience and myself actually of what a great and wonderful mentor Dr. Kendall has been to me and many students at the International Space University. And also I'm very grateful that he joined us this morning. Probably now it's about 8 a.m., but I know he joined us a little bit earlier. So he's 3 hours earlier than us here. So thank you, David. And I'm very pleased to give you the mic and the screen for Dr. Kendall's presentation titled UN COPUOS and Space Sustainability.
Okay, thank you, Irene. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Good, thanks. And the slides, I take it, are on the screen. Is that confirmed? The
Yes.
slides
Yes.
are on the screen
Right.
yet? Okay, good.
Everything.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much, Irene, for that very nice introduction. It's great to be here, well, virtually there with you today. And what I want to talk about today is space sustainability and the UN COPUOS, which is the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and the leadership I think that they've shown in this particular area. As Irene mentioned, the UN has a wonderful office for outer space affairs, and I will give you a little bit of background on COPUOS, since I'm probably some of you or many of you aren't that familiar with what COPUOS does. It works a little under the radar, but it's a very important element in space policy globally. So let me get going here. If I can move to the next slide, let me see how I do that. There we go. Okay. So the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, which is known as UN COPUOS by everybody, was set up in 1959. So we're talking here 60 years ago, by the United Nations General Assembly, which is normally abbreviated UNGA. It is based in Vienna in Austria, and the committee is supported by the Secretariat, which is provided as mentioned, the Office for Outer Space Affairs. Now, decisions are made by consensus of member states, and this is one very important element of the way that COPUOS works, because fundamentally, every single member state of the committee has to agree to any decision that comes out of the body. Now, once consensus has been reached, it goes forward, and the proposals, recommendations, etc., are ratified by the United Nations General Assembly that is based in New York. Now, currently there are 92 member states of the UN COPUOS. It's one of the larger, or one of the largest, of the United Nations committees. There are currently 2 applications in process, Singapore and Rwanda, and there are 41 permanent observer organizations who observe on a permanent basis the proceedings of the committee. I go back to this point about consensus again, because as you can imagine, the world is a very interesting place, always has been, always will be, and currently there's always geopolitics going on. Your previous speaker mentioned some of this geopolitics, and countries and states do not see eye to eye on many issues. And space is not immune to those differences. And so to try and obtain consensus of all of those states, and just to remind you that of those 92 member states, it includes all of the 80 or so members that currently have active space programs. There are about 80 countries in the world that have an active space program. So to obtain consensus on issues of policy and ways forward is let's say, a challenge. And this is what COPUOS tries to achieve. And I think we have made some significant successes in the near future, in the recent future, recent past, and for the future, with respect to the issue of sustainability. And just on the bottom of that slide, just to remind us that the USA and Canada were 2 of the 24 founding states of the committee back in 1959. So if I move on to the next, I don't seem to be able to move this for some reason from here. There we go. Okay, I use my mouse. I think I haven't been using my mouse. Okay, so COPUOS has 2 subcommittees. It has a scientific and technical subcommittee and a legal subcommittee, and they meet at different times. So there are actually 3 meetings of COPUOS every year. A 2-week session of the scientific and technical subcommittee in January, February, a 2-week meeting of the legal subcommittee in around the April timeframe, and then the main committee meets for 10 days in June to hear and take into account the decisions made by the scientific and technical and the legal subcommittees, and to put them together in a report which then goes to the United Nations General Assembly. Its mandate is to promote international cooperation and maintain space for peaceful purposes, define and strengthen the international legal regime governing space activities, encourage information sharing on global developments relating to space, and maximize the social and economic benefits of space for all states. And finally, very specifically with respect to sustainability, to build a collaborative approach to address vulnerabilities and the sustainability of space activities. Generally, it is there to ensure that space is equally benefits to all states. Since the majority of states in the committee, of course, around the world, are less developed than the dozen or so highly developed states that have very active space programs, one finds that it is the states who have let's say, emerging space programs who have the biggest voice really in that, in the committee. And so the committee is there to ensure that those benefits are spread around the globe, that emerging space countries and space countries that are thinking about space activities or have small space activities can gain as much benefits from the general utilization of space as the larger players. This is an overview of what a committee meeting looks like. At the front, you have the secretariat. It happens to be a picture when I was chairing, so you can. I'm on the screen there. There, the secretariat and the president, the chair, and the vice chairs are at the front. And each of the 92 states has a desk around the, as you see in front, with the permanent observers at the back. It's a very busy meeting. There's a lot of people there, and it's quite complex to manage. So what has UN COPUOS achieved over its 60 years of being active? Well, the thing that it's most known for are 5 United Nations treaties, plus principles and guidelines related to space. The 5 UN treaties, the Outer Space Treaty is called the Magna Carta of space activities. It has been ratified and signed by all of the major space actors, and really sets the tone for what one can and cannot do in space. It is the treaty which informs us that space is a global commons, which means that space does not belong to anybody. And there are restrictions on what one can do. I will not go into the treaties. It would take a completely different lecture. But the treaties basically are the Outer Space Treaty, the main treaty. There is a rescue agreement. There is a liability convention. There is a registration convention. And there is a moon treaty, which has not been very well ratified by many states. But I won't go into those, and you can look at those up later if you want. It has also created so many interesting new entities and programs to coordinate progress on key issues. One of the most important is called SPIDER, which deals with disaster management and emergency response. And this is a program using Earth observation data to help when and assist when there are major disasters or emergencies around the world using space data, communications, Earth observation data, etc. There's an international committee on the GNSS, Global Navigation and Satellite Systems, called the ICG, International Coordination Group. And that is a very interesting group that has been set up in the past just almost 20 years to coordinate the activities between the various global navigation satellite systems. So the US system talks to the Chinese system, to the Russian system, to the emerging Indian system, etc., and of course the European system, Galileo. So, so there is a committee which is looking at developing common standards, one might say, and interoperability between the various GNS systems. And that is a very interesting approach that has been championed and is part of the COPUOS family, one might say. And there are 2 quite recent new committees or systems that have been set up dealing with asteroids after almost 15 years of discussion. 2 committees two committees were set up. One is called the International Asteroid Warning Network, which is a group that meets on a regular basis to coordinate the data that has been obtained on asteroids and their movements out there in outer space, and to provide a warning if an asteroid is likely to interact with the Earth. And then the information from that network goes to a space mission planning advisory group, which is again a higher level group of governmental people who are there to think about and to put in place some planning that the globe would have to think about, consider, if there was a threat from an incoming asteroid. So I won't go into those in further detail. Both of those have come out of the UN COPUOS discussions recently. But the COPUOS's role has evolved to address new and complex issues. We know that space is changing and changing very rapidly, and COPUOS has basically a reflection process to ensure that it tries to address these complex and new issues. So there's an increasing dependence on space and emerging opportunities. There is a growing number of actors, and especially on the commercial side, as well as space objects. We know that the natural and man-made threats are there in and from space. One can talk about the asteroids, one can talk about space weather, and of course the man-made threats deal with things like space debris. And of course there is sustainability on Earth and in space. I'm very pleased to be here because of the fact that sustainability is such a big issue right now. And I'm very pleased to see the meeting, the symposium that you're attending, discussing this issue, because it is so important that we get this right and that we make progress on finding ways to maintain space for its sustainability as well as Earth. Now, the one point at the bottom of this slide is that COPUOS does not deal with military and defense issues. So this comes under the Conference of Disarmament, but unfortunately the Conference on Disarmament, which is based in Geneva, which is another UN body, has been blocked from really acting for about the last 20 years. And so is really a forum which is not effective. And that leaves the COPUOS to be the only really effective body, global body, considering space and space policy, space regulation, space governance issues, which is a problem because, of course, there's a lot of military and defense issues that are needing to be discussed with respect to the safety, the security, and the sustainability of space. So what are the issues that COPUOS is currently dealing with? Well, this is a bit of a repetition, but I will repeat these again. The outer space environment and its immense resources provides a critical component of the human endeavor in the 21st century. It plays a significant role in the social, economic, scientific, technology, and educational development, as well as in the field of international space and international peace and security. Sorry, I should try and go back. I don't know how to do that on this. Let's have a look. Last viewed. Let's try that again. Last viewed. Yeah, sorry. Today there are over 2,000 satellites currently operating in outer space, as I said before, from approximately 80 states. But the pace of space utilization is increasing rapidly. There are many new players, and there are many, therefore, new challenges that one has to face. Again, through geopolitics and through differences of opinion as to how space should be used for the benefit of the populations in those states. So as a consequence, the outer space environment is becoming, this is a phrase which is used very commonly, contested, congested, and competitive. And there is a growing concern in the past while, I'd say 5 to 10 years, that threats to vital space capabilities and critical infrastructures may increase during the next decade as a result of natural and man-made hazards, the increasing number of space objects and actors, and the possible development of disruptive and destructive counter space capabilities. Now, as I mentioned before, the Outer Space Treaty is over 50 years old. It's 51 years old now. It's a remarkable document, and it's been kept very. It is still a very important document, and is still very relevant to activities in space, even though it was agreed upon and formulated at a time when there were really only two major space powers. That was the Soviet Union and the United States. However, given the changes that are happening in space, the rules of conduct do need to be refreshed. And this is one of the challenges, one of the main challenges that COPUOS is dealing with right now. How do we get the various countries, the 80 states and other states that are interested in this process, how do we get them to agree by consensus to new ways of working together in order to sustain space as a vital element of of humanity? So one of the ways that this has been accomplished is through what I've termed a reflection forum. Every roughly 15 years, COPUOS has organized a major meeting which allows the states to get together in a way that is sort of brainstorming. How does space need to, how does the governance of space need to move forward? There's been 3 of these in the past, Unispace 1, 2, and 3, which I've mentioned. And just last year, in 2018, there was the latest one of those, known as Unispace, actually Unispace plus 50, to discuss the future contribution of the committee to the governance of outer space for roughly the period 2020 to 2030. This was a very active, interesting discussion where quite a lot of new ideas came out, which I'll try and share with you in the next couple of slides. The results of these deliberations was that the creation of a working group to develop a Space 2030 agenda and its implementation plan for approval by the committee, its subcommittees, and the United Nations General Assembly next year. It will be a comprehensive and forward-looking strategy for reaffirming and then strengthening the contribution of space activities and space tools for the achievement of the global agendas. Now, I must remind you of the global agendas. The global agendas, basically at the United Nations, started with the sustainability, develop a sustainable global goals. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is called, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the Paris Agreement, the so-called COP on climate change. All those 3 major UN initiatives dealing with sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, and the climate change are all due to report to the world, one might say, and back to the General Assembly on their success or lack of it in 2030. So 2030 is going to be a very big year for the United Nations when the results of all the efforts on those 3 major initiatives are reported. Now, clearly, if you're talking about sustainable development, you're talking about disaster risk reduction, and you're talking about climate change, space has an incredibly important role to play. So one of the elements that COPUOS is looking at within its 2030 agenda is how can the space infrastructures around the world be improved in order to deliver the results of these 3 major United Nations initiatives. It's also addressing sustainable development, the concerns of humankind. And it is there to contribute to charting the future contribution of the committee to the global governance of space activities. What arose from these deliberations on the future of COPUOS were 7 new, basically thematic priorities. One can say really their focuses, their foci of what COPUOS wants to concentrate on, and these will be incorporated into this new agenda. The first one is interesting, and it's the first time that space exploration and innovation has been discussed within, well, it's not discussed, but has become a major element of the agenda of COPUOS. This is going to be interesting. And the idea of the first one is global partnerships. So space exploration should be available to all states, even those emerging and developing states in space. And COPUOS is working towards putting together programs that will allow people, especially young people in those countries, to feel part of this large space exploration initiative that is happening now and will certainly accelerate over the next 10 years or so. The current and future perspectives of the legal regime of outer space and global governance. I put SS because that is really one of the fundamental space sustainability elements of the thematic priorities. I think the words speak for themselves. So it's developing, as I mentioned before, new legal regimes with respect to outer space and global governance, trying to refresh in some way the treaties that are now getting a little long in the tooth. Enhanced information exchange on space objects and events. This is really a place setter for how do we now start to share data dealing with issues that are going to that are currently worrisome for those. Sorry, I'm going to put that back if I can. There we go. So we need to think about those aspects of space that are pretty critical right now, and the two that are really very essential deal with space debris, space traffic management, and things like space weather. Although, as you can see from number 4 here, there is an international framework for space weather services, which is also a thematic priority, which again speaks to the sharing of data amongst those states who are have developed and have the capacity to monitor space weather. These are eruptions from the sun that can be very damaging to both space and assets on the Earth. Strengthened space cooperation for global health. Space has been shown and can provide significant elements of the information that's needed to work with infectious diseases, etc., etc. I won't go into that, but it is an important element that has now been identified as a major thrust for the future. International cooperation towards low emission and resilient societies. This is a way of saying climate change. Climate change is a word that some states do not like to hear, and so it's been expressed in a slightly different way here. But international cooperation towards how do we deal with the threats that we have right now, and how can space work? How can we develop more space tools and better space coordination towards ensuring that we have the best information possible to try and mitigate against climate change. And the last one is capacity building, which has always been part of the UN COPUOS mandate, but is to be developed a little more strongly. Okay, so if I can move on to the next. Okay, so the overarching objectives of the agenda is to enhance space-derived economic benefits and strengthen the space sector as a major driver of sustainable development. Then to harness the potential of space to solve everyday challenges, leverage space-related innovation to improve the quality of life for humanity, obviously. improve access for all to ensure that countries benefit socio-economically from space science and technology applications and space-based data information, and therefore support the achievement of the Sustainability Development Goals, the SDGs. Build partnerships and strengthen international cooperation for the peaceful use of outer space in the global governance of space activities. A little bit of a repetition, but just want to ensure that you understand where we are there. Now, these are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These are the goals that have been developed by the United Nations in 2015. They are extremely important. There are 169, I think, elements within these 17 goals. But the important thing about this particular issue with COPUOS is that space can be developed to help almost every one of those, some more so than others. Clearly, climate action number 13, for example, is obviously one where space is going to be critical. Clean water and sanitation, etc. But there is a link between space assets, space information, and all of those, excuse me, 17 goals. Sorry. And there's a little icon or diagram on the right, space for the SDGs, which is the way that the committee and the Office for Outer Space Affairs is developing this part of the program. So I want to emphasize here that when we're talking about sustainability on Earth, and these are the 17 sustainability goals of the United Nations, space plays an extremely important role. And COPUOS is at the forefront of developing initiatives to ensure that space is going to, or space data, space information is going to be very, very important and fill in any gaps that we have to ensure that we can deliver on those goals. Now, I want to move on to a second element of where COPUOS has been recently in sustainability, and that is a working group of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, which is the STSC, that was set up in 2010, directly considering the sustainability of outer space activities. It was a very interesting element that has been a long time in building before the working group was set up. The working group was set up with all the members of COPUOS, and was led by Peter Martinez from South Africa. And I won't go into the nitty-gritty of it, but it was a very interesting process that was finalized, and I'll go basically to the bottom here. Last year, in 2018, it produced its final report. It was endorsed by COPUOS, by the plenary, and was welcomed with appreciation by the United Nations General Assembly during its current session. Therefore, was endorsed by COPUOS finally in 2019. There was a little hiccup in 2018. We were hoping to have it ratified by COPUOS in 2018, but due to this issue of consensus, there was not consensus at that time. We had to work a little harder, and in 2019 we managed to get it through the process. So, what did this working group and this process, what was it looking at? Well, it was considering practices, technical standards, best practices effectively relevant to sustaining the space environment and space activities throughout the various phases of a mission life cycle through the development, and this is the important part, of voluntary guidelines, voluntary best practice guidelines. This is not a treaty. These are guidelines that have been set up, and these are to enhance the long-term sustainability of outer space activities for all space actors and all for all who benefit from space activities. The important thing here is that, frankly, there is no appetite currently by virtue of geopolitics to develop a treaty. Treaties are binding. A state can be taken to the International Court of Justice if it breaks its treaty obligations. Guidelines are best practices. So there has been sort of discussion as to where, well, if it's just voluntary guidelines, will states actually develop these with any seriousness? And the answer is yes. The states have, the 92 states currently have all signed on to these 21 guidelines that are currently have been agreed upon, and states really do take these types of commitments seriously. And I'm pleased to say, yes, they're voluntary. They don't have to abide by all of them, but there has been so far a very strong push by all of the states of COPUOS, member states of COPUOS, to try and incorporate these into national legislation. I won't go through this. This is just a General Assembly text welcoming with appreciation the 21 preamble and 21 guidelines of this report. If you look on the Office for Outer Space Affairs website, you will be able to see this report. And I would really urge you to go to if you're at all interested, go to the UN Office for Outer Space, UNOOSA, I think it's .org. The Office for Outer Space Affairs website. You'll see all of the details of the SDGs and how space is developing its program, how space is being developed to assist with those programs, etc. There's also an important element of this is that this was considered to be such an important breakthrough, effectively, that the committee has also agreed to a new working group under a 5-year work plan to consider. Sorry, I'll just go back here. Okay. Oops, there we go. That we'll have a new working group to continue to look at the 21 guidelines and their implementation, and to consider new guidelines that the committee might be able to put forward. There are some gaps here. There was, and I'll give you just a quick example, there was a lot of discussion on active debris removal as one of the guidelines. And that was in the end due to issues there was not complete agreement amongst all the 92 states on how that guideline should be developed, and therefore is pending for future work. And so we do need future work on some of these guidelines.
David, can you hear me?
Yes.
We were trying to give you the 2-minute warning.
Okay. Okay, I think I can go through this in
questions. I'm sure there are many questions.
Yeah, I can go to 2 minutes. Yeah. Okay, so here's a list of some of the guidelines. Let me see. There are 21 guidelines. I'm just giving you a snapshot here. For example, to enhance the registration of space activities. Now, very importantly, to improve the accuracy of orbital data on space objects, promote the collection, sharing, and dissemination of space debris information, a vital one. Performing conjunction assessments, designing satellites to increase their trackability. This is an interesting one in that as we develop smaller and smaller satellites, they're becoming harder and harder to track. Therefore, if you can put beacons or something on those satellites to increase their trackability, we will have a better idea of where they are to allow us to do conjunction analysis, etc. I will move on. Now, going back to the response, the European response to this has been excellent. They have recently set up a safety, security, and sustainability of outer space initiative. And that initiative notes that they will build on efforts such as the guidelines for long-term sustainability of outer space activities. So already Europe is now looking at developing new programs, and in fact, during the recent ministerial, there was a new space safety initiative that the European Space Agency, and they will build upon now these guidelines. So these are really having an effect. And I'd like to point out in the US, the NASA Space Advisory Council, which met in September, just a couple of months ago, developed some 8 principles dealing with space mining. And one of the outcomes of this advisory council to NASA said that Principle 2, the extraction of space resources, should be conducted in a manner that takes into account the United States commitment to the UN guidelines for long-term sustainability of outer space activities. So these guidelines are being very seriously considered by states, which is great. So my conclusion. COPUOS has taken a leadership role in providing an initial set of voluntary, non-binding sustainability guidelines that represent states' best practices across a range of space issues. The current 21 guidelines have been endorsed by each of the 92 members of the COPUOS. Several states have started to incorporate these guidelines into policy statements and legal deliberations with respect to their own space acts, legal space issues. And the implementation and possible enhancement of the guidelines is continuing because there will be a new working group. And also, as I mentioned before, COPUOS has initiated an active program, very active program, to support the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, United Nations, over the next period, by making sure that we enhance and coordinate space activities to provide necessary information to those goals. So thank you very much. I'm sorry if I was just a minute or so over time, but it was great speaking to you.
Thank you, David.
So we have time for 1 or 2 questions, but also a reminder, if you're joining us via Zoom today, that you can engage with us and ask questions using the chat feature for this presentation and throughout the afternoon.
Hi, my question has to do with what is the intersection of commercial space with these type of discussions that involve coordination with member states? I've heard some commercial, areas talk about the fact that these treaties do not involve commercial activities and they're free to do whatever they want.
Okay, excellent question. Thank you. It is a challenge that COPUOS currently has. COPUOS works on the state level. Private companies are not invited to the meetings, and therefore it's an issue that we have to deal with, since over 70% of space activities, or at least the development of new initiatives is through the commercial sector. And of course, it's becoming more and more important. So your question is very relevant. There have been a number of initiatives within COPUOS to try and bridge the gap, one might say, as to ensuring that we hear from the commercial space sector. I would say from the past chair that these have been only partially successful. We have to do better, given the importance of this sector and the fact that most of the new initiatives is coming from this area. The one thing that I would remind you is that under the Outer Space Treaty, a state is responsible for the activities of every single organization under its jurisdiction. So commercial companies or universities, for example, are not allowed to do whatever they feel that they want to do. They can, because in the end it is the state under which they have their jurisdiction who is responsible for their activities. So the state must register whatever, if an object is flown by a commercial or a university academic institution, the state must register that object. If there is damage due to that object, it is the state that is responsible and will have to pay the damages. So in the end, it is up to a state to manage its commercial and basically non-public sector activities. So although the commercial world is developing a whole bunch of very interesting new developments, the state is effectively responsible, and that comes from a treaty, not from a guideline, but from a treaty, from the Outer Space Treaty, and therefore, and the Liability Convention, and the state really has to take responsibility there. So, but the question you ask is a very good one. COPUOS needs to find ways to engage much more actively with the commercial sector, where most of the interesting activity is right now.
Fantastic. So let's thank David one more time. And really thank you, David. I know it wasn't easy to do this, but also I want to thank both Evan and Bruce who have been dealing with our technical challenges in a beautiful way.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Been a very nice experience for me. Thank you.